So I'm very glad to have this opportunity to speak about materialism, and because it's probably an area I would venture to say that money and sex, but that's not for tonight. Where's Jonathan? That's a topic for another time. Jonathan, write that down if you're taking notes. These are two areas where we, even as believers, as Bible-believing Christians, I don't think we're thinking, our thoughts, our emotions, our desire for money has been affected by the things that Jesus has said. So it's good to have this opportunity. I grew up on Long Island. I moved to Rockaway Beach when I was 17. I came from a broken home, seriously broken. At the age of 5, I saw the handwriting on the wall that there's a problem here. And so even 5, 6, 7 years of age, I knew that the problems I was experiencing in my family were not going to be fixed by money. And so it wasn't anything that I thought was really initially, I didn't give it a lot of thought at that age, but that's, I didn't figure that was an issue. And so, Kamal, you got that slideshow? Is that up? So I didn't think much about money. I knew that really wasn't going to help me much in what I was going through. The marriage finally when I was about 9 years old, and it was more like, what took so long? Maybe if they were trying to stay together for the kids, I don't know. But anyway, it was painful and difficult, and so I knew that wasn't. And then further, I remember one time I was reading a magazine. My mother had a magazine around the house, and it had Sophia Loren on the cover. I was kind of young. I think it was around 14. Which seems young, but I was Catholic grammar school and still kind of innocent. It was 1968. And they had a picture of Sophia Loren, you see her there. And my mother was telling me that she's happy. I'm like, well, of course. Why wouldn't she be? She's Sophia Loren. She's rich. She's famous. She's a movie star. She said, no. She had all of that stuff and she was never happy. But she's happy now. And I was like, why? And she said, because she had a baby. She and Carlo Ponti had a baby in 1968, and she was happy for the first time because that's what she wanted. She couldn't have one. I think she had 3 miscarriages. And so finally there on this cover, it was like she was happy for the first time. And so the way my mother told me this story, again, we didn't come from a Christian family. Alcohol and vitriol are 2 adjectives that describe it. But my mom had something going on, and she told me this story like it was a Bible story. Like, she had money, she had fame, she had fortune, she had notoriety, but she wasn't happy. Money doesn't make you happy. And then I just saw it in the 60s, even in Rockaway, the working poor and the poor in other parts of the city. I saw people hanging out. Again, it was the 60s, no air conditioning. So this kind of weather, people were out on the streets, people out on their stoops, sitting on fire escapes, on the boardwalk, and I saw people drinking. I grew up with people drinking, and I'm like, this is what you do to have peace. And then also, it was the 60s, 1969 Woodstock. That's the album cover, you all. Remember vinyl? That was the album cover. And so the 60s, with the countercultural movement, the hippies saying we're anti-establishment, it was built on like the 50s, bohemian poets, on the road, Jack Kerouac. It was like travel, vagabonds, hit the streets, back to nature. And so everything that I was told in the culture of that day was, light up and leave me alone, and the drugs and everything. So naturally, I thought, well, of course, drugs is the way to go. I never met a narcotic I didn't like. And so that's kind of, even I was a believer for about 4 or 5 years when Nancy Reagan came out with that program, Just Say No to Drugs. I was a Christian for 5 years, and when I first heard that, I literally laughed out loud. I'm like, say no to drugs? Why would you say no to drugs? What's the point of that? But anyway, so that's how, so materialism wasn't much of a lure for me, but some of the things that I learned from the 60s, I figured, yeah, that's the way to go. I was a Spanish major in college, mostly so I could travel, and I was in 10 different countries of the world. I lived in Spain, 10 different countries of Europe. But so that's the way I grew up, right? And that was the counterculture. But what was the counterculture rebelling against? And it was a real counterculture. They were talking revolution. They were going to bring in a revolution through music and love and peace. But this is how these United States got started since its inception. America, more than any other nation, has been invested with dreams of a new future. A few English Christians caught up in the Reformation dreamed of a new future in which the intentions of God could be fully realized. John Winthrop stood on the foredeck of the Arabella in 1648 as it sailed into Massachusetts Bay. This is what he said: "God has called us to be a city set on a hill for all the eyes of the world to see." The Puritans who had risked the sea were resolute in their commitment to act out the future intentions of God in this new land. But their vision was to fall on hard times, and the Puritan vision had little influence on the American dream. So that's how these Puritans, these believers, these Christians came to the United States, because if you had bad doctrine in Europe at this time, you could get killed. They would throw you in a river. In church history was one of the most problematic courses I took in seminary. I mean, even people that you reckon, Luther and Calvin, they were part of it. You would be thrown in jail. You would be tortured. You would be thrown in the river if you didn't have good doctrine. And so they were all, this was kind of like, hey, maybe this new world, you won't be persecuted if you have bad, what we would call bad doctrine, or what they would call bad doctrine. Like, let's just chill a little. And so that was the way the United States was begun. But, as he points out, and these are quotes from Thomas Sines' book, The Mustard Seed Conspiracy. So that's how it began, like, hey, we could do something good with this. But Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin had other thoughts. They didn't like this Puritan vision. They had an American dream. In Poor Richard's Almanac, Ben Franklin indoctrinated a whole people in the secular values of this new religion of America. Those values included industry, power, acquisitiveness, underline that if you're taking notes, thrift, respect for authority, conformity, prosperity, prestige, and most of all, personal success. The acquisitive, aspiring self was the very center of Franklin's gospel and the American dream. Well, you can see how that kind of puts the Puritan visions in the trash can, right? So this is the foundation of the American dream, and the American dream becomes a nightmare for anybody with any kind of biblical faith. And this is what kind of beat the Puritan vision. Puritan vision is a piece of history. The American dream is on our minds and our hearts. People still come to this country today for that very dream. So that's what's going on in the background of these Americans. And as Americans, even if you came to this country as an immigrant, as my grandparents did, or maybe your parents, your grandparents, or you, as you live in America, this country has got to be considered rich. Now, mostly I wouldn't consider myself rich, and you might not either. You say, I'm middle class. But if you got a pair of shoes or two, if you look at the Bible, you're rich. And so therefore, we need to be aware of that. So here are some biblical ideas about what the Bible says about money. First of all, money is a rival god that seeks our worship. That's dangerous. Money is out there trying to lure you, seduce you, coming on to you, and you better be ready to resist the wiles and the seductive aroma of money, because she's coming on strong. But Jesus said no servant can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. That's Jesus. I heard a woman once say, you can't ride two horses with one behind. So you got to decide who you're going to dance with, because you can't serve God and money. And like Isaiah says, we honor him with our lips, but our hearts are far from him. So you could say, I mean, we're in church. You came out, so, to your credit. But I mean, where is the devotion of our hearts? What do we... Where are our affections? The wealth of the rich is their fortified city. They imagine it an unscalable wall. We trust in money. Even the dollar bill says, in God we trust. Wrong. The Bible says it's in money you trust. It's your unscalable wall. And that was written a long time before John Winthrop made his little sermon on the foredeck of the Arabella. So money's a rival god that seeks our worship. So number one, it's like it's a dangerous commodity. You know, we all think, let me accumulate as much of it. If you read this and take it seriously, it might be something you want to throw off the back of a train, because it's a dangerous substance, as we will see in this next slide. This is why the 60s hated technology and all of this stuff. We want to go back to nature, man. Smoke herb. Our current material status may impact our future spiritual status in heaven. I wrote that sentence, but that's a summary of biblical teaching. Our current material status may impact our future spiritual status in heaven. Do you believe that? That's what the Bible teaches. And again, we're all rich. That Bible teaches that too. So as rich people, you got to be careful. 1 Corinthians 7 is, and we're not going to turn there, but you can check it out. Read it tonight before you go to bed if you like. It's an amazing chapter. You know, Paul wrote it. Paul is very much unlike Peter, very much unlike me. He was like type A. I'm like, thank God it's Friday, go to the beach. Paul was like, thank God it's Monday. Type A, very serious. If anybody doesn't want to agree with the things I'm writing, consider him anathema. He tells people, don't have lunch with them. Stop eating with them. He can be dogmatic and apostolic and hardcore. But in 1 Corinthians 7, he's got all of these expressions that he used, like, listen to me, this is my opinion. Consider my opinion as somebody who's been called upon by God to offer these. And you see him waffling. You see him like, well, you can do this and you can do that. You go, it got my attention. I'm like, what's he doing? What's happening? And so what he's doing is he's entering an area where it's a gray area. And so the Corinthian church wanted to know about, should we get married? And he says, well, of course you can get married. It's good for a man to get married. It's good, rather than burn with passion, get married, But he points out that when you make a decision like marriage, you're also, for this day and age, because there's no marriage in the kingdom to come, he says, it's also, you got to realize, you got to know beforehand that your decision to marry is going to affect blessings and benefits when you get to heaven. It's not going to affect your salvation, but decisions that we make now affect us. He says, like, the married man is considering how to please his wife, and the married wife is considering how she can please her husband. And this is going to have not only adverse, challenges here on this planet, but while you're doing that, you're worried about shoes for the kids and tuition, and we got to pay the bills for this and that and the other thing. It's like you're not thinking about doing gospel ministry, preaching the gospel here, moving to another place where you can be full-time ministry. So it's going to have effect on how things work out in the future. And so that's why Paul's comments on marriage, and you can apply his comments on marriage. Should we buy a house? You can buy a house, but if you buy a house, it means you're going to be settled here. You're not just going to up and sell your house and move to some third world country where they really need to hear the news about Jesus Christ. These decisions have impact. And current material status may impact our future status, and that's most clearly seen in the rich man in Hades, a parable Jesus taught, Luke 16. Luke 16 is about money. It's about stewardship. Straight on, straight through, it's all about money. But in the course of Jesus telling this parable of Luke 16 about the rich man and Lazarus, while he's speaking about money, we also learn more about hell than anywhere else in the New Testament, including the book of Revelation. Luke 16, 19 to 31, this rich man winds up in hell, and he's like, whoa, what just happened? Because he's large and in charge when he's on the planet, so he thinks he's just going to roll. He should have had my mother. My mother says, what do you think, you're just going to waltz into heaven? No, you're not. So his mom should have told him. Because he woke up in hell and it was like, I'm sorry, where am I? And it's funny, if you look at the story, he's typical rich guy because he still thinks he's running the show. He says, Abraham, tell Lazarus to dip the tip of his ring. Bring him some water because I'm hot and thirsty. He's like, excuse me, what? It's like, dude, you're there, we're here. There's a chasm, there's a gulf between us, and Lazarus ain't going anywhere, and he's not serving you, you know? The guy, you know, he's shocked. And he said, well, then send Lazarus. He's like, leave Lazarus alone. Lazarus slept on your doorstep. You never did anything to help him. Now he's here with me. Now he's in peace. Now he's being comforted. Leave Lazarus out of this. You're there, and he's here. Stop it. And he's concerned about his brothers, he's concerned about himself, and he's realizing the lights are going on. And it's because he wound up in that position because of his affection and the way he treated money. His finances had more influence on his life than faith. And that's why he wound up there. And then finally, let's Jesus' blessings and woes, Luke chapter 6. If I told you Jesus had a sermon, short as it is, you can see 7 verses there on blessings and woes, you would think that there would be blessings for us as believers, right? And woes for unbelievers. Well, Jesus, he's the I am. He can't be pinned down. Luke 6:20 following, he says, and he lifted up his eyes on his disciples and he said, blessed are you who are poor. Now, Matthew says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Luke says, Luke says, blessed are the poor. So he's not talking about, Matthew's talking about some humble, contrite people. Luke says, no, the poor are the ones that are blessed because God is going to take care of them. He looks upon them. He cares for them. Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you who hunger now. Matthew says, blessed are you when you hunger and thirst for righteousness. Luke says, I'm talking about food. I'm talking about money. I'm talking about the basics of life. Blessed are the poor, not the poor in spirit. Blessed are the hungry, not those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Luke's got a whole different slant. Or maybe Jesus has a whole different slant. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you shall be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you and when they exclude you and revile you and spurn your name as evil. Well, who gets excluded? Who's not? Okay, if you're excluded and reviled and your name is spurned, you're marginalized. You're the outcasts. He's not talking about A-listers. He's not talking about what we would call the Hollywood, the beautiful people, right? Those are the ones that we want them to come to our party, you know? We want, you name names, And it's like, Jesus is against that. He says those things that are highly valued among men are detestable in God's sight. Again, that's Luke. So the idea that you want to be with beautiful people, famous people, wealthy people, rich people, good-looking people, he's like, blessed are you when people hate you and when they exclude you, they revile you on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven, for so their fathers did to the prophets. And now the woes, blessed are you who are rich, for you have already received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you shall be hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you'll mourn and weep. Woe to you when all people speak well of you, for so their fathers did to the false prophets. So, I challenge. Jesus is flipping the script. He's challenging the way you think about money, your affections that you have, and this world system. Final point. Come on. That's 4 clicks. Let's go. Bingo. The Bible endorses generous giving, mercy, and justice for the poor. So that's how the Lord, the Bible, from Genesis to maps. This is what the Lord would encourage us to do. You don't have to, if you got money, if you realize I'm American, I'm wealthy, I got savings, I got an IRA. He endorses generous giving, mercy, and justice for the poor. These are all from Proverbs. Whoever oppresses a poor man insults his maker, but he who is generous to the needy honors him, meaning his maker. Whoever mocks the poor insults his maker. Whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deeds. How about them apples? Whoever gives to the poor will not want, but he who hides his eyes will get many a curse. The righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concern. Do you have a concern for the poor? The Bible, you have to always be careful about using always. Never say never, but the Bible always advocates for the poor. It never has anything negative to say. We sometimes do, like they're welfare cheats and they're having more children that they might increase their benefits and why don't they get jobs and that kind of stuff. The Bible never speaks like that about the poor. The Bible always advocates for the poor, defends them. And it says the righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concern. Check it out, because I checked it out. I told you too some good things my mom said. There were some bad things my mom said, including her view of the poor was totally unbiblical, totally without foundation. And not only unbiblical, but so many of those things, even those myths I just shared with you, they're unsubstantiated by statistics. The idea that poor folk are having more children that they might is wrong. You know, that if they could get jobs, most men would get a job and, you know, happily take it. So it's unsubstantiated by statistics. The righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concern. So, avodah, from the Hebrew lexicon. There's a funny expression in the Bible. It's called, and they don't translate it. Even modern translations, they like moved away from it. You have to go back to the King James, the King Jimmy. In the King Jimmy, they have this expression called "gird up your loins." You can see why they get rid of it, right? What? I'm sorry, what? Gird up your loins. And it's for work. You gird up your loins for work, for war, and for worship. And avodah is linked with those things. That these are reasons why you need to get busy. Put on your big boy pants. This might be one way to render it. They don't translate it in modern translations any longer, but avodah is for those kinds of things, translated work, labor, service, or bondage. But when the service is offered to God, it is not bondage, but rather a joyous and liberating experience. Adam and Eve worked in the garden before the fall, and from the book of Revelation we see we're going to be working in heaven, but we're going to be working for the glory of God, not for our own sakes, not for our own vain glory or that somebody, you know, for fame or reputation. So when the service is offered to God, it's not bondage, but joyful and liberating service. And also frequently the Bible records that this service was given to other gods who were not gods at all. So as we think about serving God and loving Him, we want to do so in a way that glorifies Him and is not about glorifying ourselves. So that's just some thoughts on fighting materialism in the work.